last night the Cincinnati Bengals faced off against the New York Giants on Sunday Night Football, and it was one of the more forgettable primetime games, I think, of the season as a whole. It was competitive at least, and there were good things to take out of this, specifically from two defenses that had a lot of question marks coming into this game between Cincinnati and New York, where I feel like this is a situation where you look at the Bengals and the Giants, really, at that point. They are both sort of in desperation mode to some degree. I'd say the Bengals more than the Giants, for the specific point that the Giants didn't necessarily come into this season, I don't think, with, playoff aspirations, maybe to some degree. I'm sure Brian Daboll internally had those hopes for his team, but ultimately a situation where Daboll and this Giants team are just sort of undermanned in a lot of these matchups, but credit their defense, which has been performing very much over expectations up to this point in the year. Last night, they are without Kayvon Thibodeau, who's been having a great year, and you see some of these other players stepping up for them. Brian Burns, maybe a little bit more of the expected presence. They went out, they invested into him, draft capital and money itself to get Brian Burns, so good to see him stepping up in a moment like that when they need him. And then on the other end, Azeez Ojulari, obviously he ended up falling off of that sack of Joe Burrow earlier in the game that could have potentially been a safety. Announcers were sort of pinning it on the new rules. I don't know. I just think it was kind of a soft tackle from Ojulari, but then he bounced back with what was an incredible performance where he was kind of everywhere. He had a couple sacks, a couple tackles for losses. I thought it was very impressive to see him sort of put out that type of a performance when the opportunity opened up for him with Thibodeau out for them. That's when you have to... I think that's the makeup of a very sound team, is having players that can step up into roles like that. And the Giants were able to do so last night. You look at their secondary as well, which is still very much inexperienced. We've seen them have mental lapses at times. If you go back to that Cowboys game on Thursday Night Football a couple weeks ago, really where that game changed was the breakdown in coverage between, I think it was Tyler Nubin and Deonte Banks on the outside with CeeDee Lamb, where Lamb was able to score that long touchdown, and the Cowboys kind of just rode off of that for taking the lead and milking the game from there. But I thought that they did an excellent job against what is a very good Bengals wide receiver core. Yeah, T. Higgins is going to get a little bit more one-on-one opportunities when they are sending so much pressure at Jamar Chase. And it's not like Chase was invisible. Higgins, 7 catches for 77 yards. Chase was 5 catches for 72 yards. But ultimately, I thought that they really held their own. And to be able to limit a Bengals passing attack that has been on fire in recent weeks, granted maybe against some softer defenses in the Commanders, the Panthers, the Ravens. I'd say they even performed pretty well against the Chiefs in week 2. And for the Giants to hold it to just a total of 208 passing yards for Burrow, that is very impressive in my books. And ultimately, I think that both of these teams do have, even though, again, the game was largely forgettable, I think that these are real things that each of these defenses can build upon, that neither one of them both of them had been largely disrespected. Giants had been improving in recent weeks, but again, without Thibodeau, it seemed like there was maybe going to be an opportunity that the Bengals were going to be able to run up and down the field on the Giants, and that really didn't end up being the case. It was the Joe Burrow 1 touchdown, and maybe that's something to take into consideration, is really in a couple of these matchups for the Giants these past couple weeks, it's been the one explosive play that's burned them, so I'm sure they would like to eliminate those, but really it was just the 55-yard or 47-yard Joe Burrow touchdown rush, and outside of that, Giants kind of bottled up what the Bengals were trying to do, and Bengals on the other side, this is a team that, as much as their offense has been firing over the past handful of weeks, they have also very much been, torn down for their play on that defensive side of the ball, and for good reason, because it has been very ugly on a number of these occasions. But that being said, I mean, the Bengals are now, they at least pitched this mostly shutout, where obviously it's the one touchdown. I mean, Tyrone Tracy, he ends up, having a decent game for himself, but ultimately, Giants just, they were going for it on fourth down on the regular. They didn't even really coach around, trying to get these chunk plays on third downs. It got to a certain point where Brian Daboll was just like, whatever. We're just going to run this 4 downs every time. Let's run it on a 3rd and long. Let's just try and make this a more manageable 4th down conversion, which is crazy, but it's also just kind of the reality of the situation for the Giants, where their offense is still just so limited. And I understand at some point, in the GSMC production meeting earlier today, we're talking about, well, this is what you get out of the Giants. This is what you get out of the Giants offense. Fair. I can't disagree with that statement. But it's a little bit more than that, I think, facing a Bengals defense that has been terrible to start the year. And, Daniel Jones is somebody where I have defended at times in terms of, I think that he is a scapegoat, and he's been sort of, put for a lot of the blame for some things that are even out of their control. Their defense hasn't been elite for the past couple years. Their offensive line hasn't been good, and Daniel Jones has just been sort of paid to take those hits, and he led them to the playoffs one year. What I'm basically getting at here is Daniel Jones can be overly scrutinized, but these are the games that are just so frustrating for him. I understand there are other situations where you go back to a game like against the Cowboys and ultimately he played fine, and if the rest of the team was better, they would have won. He missed some of the deeper opportunities. The lack of aggression from him is something that I came out of that game with a lot of frustration with, and I kind of mirror a lot of that sentiment here. And, I think it's just clear that Daboll is kind of done with him. The fact that they are just so unwilling to even take real deep shots with him at this point that it's just sort of, just drop back, take what's in front of you, the majority of the action around those 5 yards downfield. He had just two completions past 10 yards through the air in this game. Not really a great look there. Again, I guess they moved it fine, but I just thought this was massively disappointing, and I know that a lot of Giants fans probably feel that same way, that they, actually did sort of they did objectively outgain the Bengals throughout the course of the night. They were able to actually win the time of possession battle. They had 11 more first downs than the Bengals did in this game, but really it is one explosive play allowed on defense, and their offense just not being able to actually step up are what were so detrimental for them in this game. And ultimately, they fall. Neither one of these teams you have to be feeling excellent about. Like I mentioned, I started this segment off a lot more optimistic than I just got with the Giants towards the end of this. But, both of these defenses should be proud of themselves for how they played last night. Obviously, it's a little bit more frustrating for the Giants, who that one play is really what burned them. The other touchdown that came was basically at the end of the game when it was just about wrapped up. With 1:52 left in the game. But, either way, this is a situation where I don't feel great about either one of these teams in terms of playoff hunt, but can't say they're dead just yet. And especially if they can continue to get that level of play against different offenses. If they can get that level of play out of their defenses against maybe some higher level teams, then that's a lot to build on, and especially for the Giants, where I do think that the Bengals are a legitimately good offense. But let me know what your thoughts were from this game. We are going to be switching gears here, and we're going to be diving into the Washington Commanders falling just short against the Baltimore Ravens. Going to be talking about that game as the Commanders are hoping to make sure that this wasn't just a little bit of a flash in the pan for the level of success that they had early on in the year. We're going to be diving into this, but first we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.